Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show, where we celebrate every single day the amazing people who make this place, coastal Mississippi, and Mississippi for that matter, such a great place to live, work, and play. You know, we are fast approaching the end of the hurricane season, and this hurricane season was about what they expected, an El Nino year. It played out about the way they expected it to play out. We worried a little bit along the way, but as it turns out, coastal Mississippi dodged another hurricane season bullet, and we'll now look forward to next year and see how it all plays out. But there's not a better guy to chat about the hurricane season, not just here in America, but really around the world, than my friend Josh Morgerman, Cyclone. He is the hurricane man himself. By the way, if there was a world record for hurricane chases or in the eye or in the eye wall, he would hold it, literally in hurricanes around the world. How you doing, my friend?
Real good, Ricky. It's good to be back. Feel like I haven't been here on this show in a while.
Well, you know what that means? It means it was kind of good for us, not just us here in coastal Mississippi, for us in the Gulf region. We did have one storm to contend with, but at the end of the day, I followed up after that into the Big Bend area of Florida not long after that, and they mostly dodged a bullet. It could have been very significant. You and I have chatted a little bit about that, but man, you've been all over the world. You just got back from a specific celebration, or actually celebration is probably not the word, but it's a celebration of resiliency from the Philippines and Hurricane or Typhoon Haiyan. We'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But before we get into the sort of tropical discussion, most people know by now that you're building a house. You have a very, very successful business in L.A. You have a home in L.A. You spend a lot of time in L.A., but during the season, you now have a secondary home that you're building here in coastal Mississippi in Bay St. Louis, and you're getting close to being finished with that, aren't you?
Getting real close. Yeah. It's been a big process, but we're getting down to like things like trim and paint colors now. So yeah, definitely getting there, and it's very exciting. I've never built a house, and it's I don't have kids, but I imagine it's sort of like watching a kid grow and be born. That's what it feels like. It feels like a birth struggle, but almost there, and actually it's very exciting now because when I go in the house, I'm starting to get a feel for what it's actually going to be like to live in it, to eat in it, to breathe in it, to plan chases in it.
Yeah. So what's cool about your house, as we've discussed before, but if someone's listening for the first time, Josh and I shared a lot of notes along the way because, as most of you know, my family and I stayed at our house on Back Bay for Hurricane Katrina, and many times during that storm we wondered if we were going to survive. We eventually sold that house and built a house next door, and when we did, we took all of the learnings from the Katrina experience and we built to what is called the gold standard, and it requires very, very specific things that you do, and it has to be certified, and then by doing that, first of all, you got a more sturdy structure to stay in for the next storm, but also you get better insurance rates on top of it. So we went through that process. Josh has gone through that process at his home in Bay St. Louis. He what was interesting about the journey that you've been on, you picked a great architect, a good builder, and a number of other partners along the way that have helped you kind of build this house that is to a gold standard, that would be something that you'd be willing to stay in for a major hurricane that might hit Bay St. Louis. So it's been a hell of a journey for you, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I learned a lot along the way. When I started building this house, I didn't know anything about it. And I learned a lot about, all the ways that you make a house, wind resistant and everything else. And, the house, I would say it's a good combination of sort of good old fashioned sort of, building wisdom plus some new technologies and everything else. But yes, in terms of wind, I feel very confident in this house that I would, that I could ride out almost any hurricane in it. The water is another story, but the house is, it's on fairly high ground. The ground is 19 feet and the house is raised several feet above that. I mean, you can see the Gulf. It's right down the street. It's only a block and a half away. But the first floor of the house is, or the ground floor is 23 feet above. So basically, the only way water is going to reach it is another cataclysm like Katrina, where water did reach that property. But life is all about sort of calculated risk. And Katrina was, folks in Mississippi, we have the unfortunate honor of having the storm surge here in the western part, like in Hancock County and western Harrison County. The storm surge in that area around Waveland, Bay St. Louis, past Christiane, Long Beach, that was the highest storm surge on record in the Western Hemisphere in any hurricane. So that's kind of like an unbelievable stat. So that was like an absolute worst case scenario. And I decided, I don't think that's going to happen again. Statistically, it's unlikely in the next 50 years, so I'm not going to worry about it. So
you're going to build a house that will withstand the wind.
Exactly.
And that's what you did. But it's something to plan that. It's my wife Ann and I have been through several building projects together over the life of our marriage, and we've had good luck. We've had some cost overruns along the way. We know what that looks like, but you learn a lot. And when you're getting into the gold standard part of it, you really can't have a weak point, because what will happen is the wind will find the path of least resistance. So it has to be buttoned up. And whether you're talking about bolting the roof to the foundation or whatever it might be, you can't leave a stone unturned. It's been fun to watch you through your planning. You went through all that process to say, okay, here are the things that we're going to do, but then you actually watch it take place, and it gives you more confidence, doesn't it, that you've built a really, really safe house?
100%. First of all, I just want to say thanks to you and Ann. Ann in particular, we've had some good conversations, but Ann was full of some good wisdom about, having been through the process of building a home. She gave me some really good advice about, before the walls are closed up, like getting pictures of like all the kind of inner workings of the wiring and stuff, so that if something happens, you know where things are. Ann had all kinds of good advice about that. But yeah, what I've learned most is the importance of sort of the interconnectivity of all the pieces, that the walls have to be really bolted to the foundation. The top plate needs to be really bolted to those walls. The roof needs to be really seriously fastened to that top plate. Everything, like there can't be, everything's got to be super like just sort of really connected. And that's the way that you kind of, that's the way you ensure that nothing's going to rip off in a hurricane. When you get those really intense hurricane winds, it's not just sort of horizontal force. It also causes what's called uplift, where actually literally things are pulled upward. And that's a big part of what causes like roofs to come off and stuff like that. So these are some things you have to kind of anticipate, and sort of make sure that your house can resist. There's all kinds of stuff. The codes down here are pretty strict. The city inspector for Bay St. Louis has come by a couple times, and they've had a couple little things that they wanted us to do. And, and I don't mind it. I think it's good. I think the more eyes on the house and the more little nitpicky things, the better, because it's going to give me that peace of mind when another, crazy hurricane comes in. Going back before Katrina, going back to Camille, the eye of Camille, which was the second strongest hurricane in U.S. history in terms of wind speed, the eye passed right over Bay St. Louis. And my neighbors across the street, they're a family that's been there forever. So I talked to the woman who lives there. She was a teenager at the time. But the water did not actually get up there in Camille, but they obviously had crazy wind. So I was like, all right. So I think the house I built, I could ride out the second coming of Camille in that house, I believe.
It's an interesting process, though. You go through all this like fortification conversations, and of course you want it architecturally to be fitting with the sort of style and sense of place for Bay St. Louis, and that it's a good fit, and that you want to be a great neighbor, and you're building something that adds value. You go through all those conversations, and then the sheetrock starts to go up, and then you start to see, wow, these are actually rooms here now, and I can walk through it, and this is where the kitchen's going to be, and you go through, it's like you go to a new phase of the building process, and then the paint starts to go up, and the cabinets start to go in, and you start to feel, wow, this is the house that I'm gonna be in. It's a cool process, isn't it?
Oh, completely. And it's funny you talk about, there's a few phases of the of the process where you really have a moment where you're like, oh, wow. And one of them was the sheetrock going up. It's really the opposite of what I expected happened. Like I thought, okay, once the sheetrock goes up and then it's like the space is divided into a bunch of little rooms, then it's going to feel really small. And it was actually the opposite. Once
it gets bigger. It gets bigger.
Yeah, once the interior walls went up, I'm like, wow, man, this is like a big house. Like, well, to me it is at least. But I was like, I just felt like, oh, cool. Okay, it's like a real house. For some reason, it felt smaller when it was just,
right.
one big space, which I thought was kind of counterintuitive, but an interesting moment.
It's an optical illusion. It definitely is an optical illusion that takes place. But once you get the walls in place and the height of the ceiling in place, and you start to get sort of this expanse of the rooms and whatever, it really then starts to become a home that you can say, wow, now I can really live here. Hey, listen, when we come back on the other side with Josh Morgerman, we're going to talk about a recent trip that he took to the Philippines to observe the anniversary of Haiyan. A major, major experience, and it was amazing to watch how the community was so receptive to you and your partners. We'll see you after this. Back with Josh Morgerman, Icyclone, the Hurricane Man, you name it. He's been called it. He is a world record holder. He would be a world record holder if there was such a thing for chasing hurricanes around the world. It's just something he's good at and does and knows how to do it and will continue to do it, I guess, until you can't do it anymore. Is that your plan?
I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm planning to retire here in this house that I'm building, is so that even when I'm a real old guy, I can stay in the game and still do local chases.
That's incredible that you do it. Hey, listen, we're going to come to this anniversary for Typhoon Haiyan here in just a second, but let's kind of bring people up to date on what you're doing. You got a very, very significant social media presence to Icyclone. You've got the Weather Nation gig. You've got a reality show that you've worked on over the time. Kind of update us on all those different bits and pieces.
Yeah, so my Weather Nation gig, it's a seasonal gig, and it's almost up for this year because we're coming to the end of the Atlantic season. Love working with them, as I've said many times. They give me so much creative freedom that I get to just come up with sort of new formats, new ideas in terms of kinds of content, and they really let me experiment, and it's great. And I so enjoy working with them. And even when I'm covering a hurricane, they're very sort of flexible in terms of how they let me do that. Whereas with some of the other news type channels that I've worked with, it's much more rigid. You have producers kind of breathing down your neck, just basically dictating to you how you're gonna tell the story. Weather Nation really lets me be the weirdo that I am and tell the story in my way. And what they get from that is some cool, like, non-generic reporting.
Yeah. There's an authenticity to it. It is, you are who you are. Then, as we discussed many times, because of my media background, I understand what it's like to have a story framed in New York City and then implemented down here on the Gulf Coast. And sometimes the frame doesn't fit the story at all, but they don't care. They're going to frame it the way they want to frame it. And for someone like you, who's really into the authenticity, that is a non-starter, really.
100%. This has been I've been working a lot in TV and sometimes with big corporations. When my series Hurricane Man was happening, before I signed my contract with the BBC in the United Kingdom and with UK TV, I had to make it really clear. I was like, listen, I want to make this show with you guys, and I get that this is a big business deal and everything, but there's a couple of lines we can't cross, and one is I can't have executives in London telling me which storms to go after or where to go. That was like a red line. And it is for my domestic work as well. And that's what Weather Nation's so cool about that. They're not like, well, we really want you to be in Tampa because that's where the people are. They don't do that. They're like, they let me just hunt it down, do my thing. Another part of my agreement with Weather Nation is they don't make me wear Weather Nation branded stuff. They let me, wear my black T-shirts. They let me be me. And that's just, listen, I mean, as you get older, creative control becomes a really important thing. It's more important to me now than when it was when I was younger. When I was first doing TV, I was just excited to be on TV. As I've kind of gone on, in this process, you want to stay connected to who you are.
So what's been interesting watching you this year is that your excitement for the international chase, something you didn't get a chance to do during COVID, and the world really opened up to you again, didn't it?
Bam, totally. I mean, it was really interesting. COVID happened in 2020, and what was interesting is it coincided perfectly with this unbelievable burst of American hurricane activity. So in terms of keeping my chasing life alive, the timing was perfect. The 2 years that I was just trapped in the United States and Mexico, we can go to Mexico. The 2 years that I was trapped in these two countries, there was just so much activity, and so it almost didn't matter. I was kept busy, but I really missed. I'm an explorer. I'm an international voyager, and I missed that sort of part of my life. And this was the first year that just all the sort of old COVID travel restrictions are gone, even from countries like Japan and Taiwan that were super strict. So that's been what's been exciting about this year, was just sort of reconnecting with my international side, just going to Taiwan to chase a big old typhoon down there. That was just awesome getting back there. Going back to the Philippines, which we're going to talk about in a second, I know, but reconnecting to these places. I mean, I love chasing in these foreign countries. Right now, I'm eyeing something in India, possibly next week, in the Bay of Bengal. And I just, as much as I love being here on the Gulf Coast, and I love Gulf Coast hurricanes, in some ways it's my favorite turf. There's something exciting about going to the other side of the earth to hunt down these storms.
Let's take Taiwan, for example. I'm blown away by what you're able to do. You're going to these places with a lot of turf that you're not familiar with. And maybe in some cases you are because you've done it before. But, I mean, in some cases not speaking the language, and you make your way. I don't know how you do that. And you end up chasing the storms very similar to like you would do in Mexico, for example. How do you do that?
I mean, each country has its own challenges, and there's some things that are harder about Taiwan. There's some things that are easier. So let's compare Taiwan with Mexico. So language barrier is worse in Taiwan because Mexico, I speak a little Spanish, but Taiwan's infrastructure is a little better, and also there's a little, it's probably a little safer in Taiwan. So those things make it easier. So it's just everything's sort of there's sort of pluses and minuses. The tough thing with chasing in East Asia is the first step is a 14 or 15-hour flight just to get to that side of the earth, that continent. And then there's usually another flight after that, and then a lot of driving. So you got to really be kind of on the top of your game to just sort of fight through those time zone differences and everything else. And, I don't know how many of your listeners regularly do those long haul kind of flights, 14, 16-hour flights, but they're kind of toxic. They really zap your body and your mind. So there's a whole, I've really learned how to kind of just fight through that and, land on the ground ready to just hunt, just keep going, that's a big challenge too. In some of these countries, sometimes I chase with a fixer. That makes things a lot easier. Someone who speaks the local language and everything else, can even do some of the driving. But a lot of times I'm just on my own doing it myself. Taiwan is a particularly tough one, and Japan is hard because there's just very few people in those countries. They just tend not to speak any English, even in the touristy areas. So that makes it challenging.
Hey, my son Justin is working on an international gig right now that's going to take him all over the world. And he's got a meeting that he's preparing to do. He's going to go down to India to do 2 days of training and then go back to New York City. And Ann was looking at the map this morning. She said, I really, just had to get it in my head. What was a flight from New York City to India? What does that look like? And she said, do you realize what's involved? I said, yeah, it's a long way, isn't it? Especially for a 2-day trip, because your body doesn't even adjust and you're turning around coming back again. But man, it's those long, the 15-hour flight, for example, we did 11 hours to Europe, and that killed both of us, but it's tough.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why I say, I tell when I go to chaser conventions and I talk to, a lot of storm chasers are just, they don't even have passports. They're just, they only chase the United States. And I try to kind of explain to them, what it's like chasing around the world. And I emphasize physical and mental conditioning a lot, because I'll tell you, man, your physical fitness, it helps to be in good shape to get through a 14-hour flight and just get off that plane ready to go. It's like, I know it sounds the opposite of what you think. Like, okay, well, you had 14 hours just to rest, but it's like, nah, it's actually like a toxic 14 hours, and your body kind of, how you bounce back from that, and are you ready to just go after that? I think it depends a lot on physical and also mental conditioning. Can you go without the sleep and everything?
Well, what's interesting is when there is activity happening around the world, and watching you post about the possibility that you might go, and how enthusiastic you are about the possibility that you might go. And then when you make a decision that you're going to go, you just vanish. When you decide to go, you go now, right? Because you've already done the timing to say, okay, here's when I need to be there, and it's go at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's the lead up to the decision to chase is always one of the hardest parts. And I'm not talking when, there's something threatening Texas. That's easy. Just get in the car and drive there. If it comes together, cool. If it doesn't, just drive home. But like when it's like, okay, am I going to go to Taiwan? Am I going to go to the Philippines? Am I going to go to India next week, which I might do? Those are tough decisions because they involve a lot of time and a lot of money. And so there's always there's a lot of angst usually before making that decision. And then when I make the decision, then usually it's like I usually make the decision too late, and then I'm rushing like mad. So that's why I'm usually quiet for a little while.
Yeah. Wow. So we're visiting with my friend Josh Morgerman. He's a hurricane chaser. And he's got a really successful marketing company. He does a little bit of everything. He's got a reality TV show. He works with Weather Nation. He's got a big social media following. He's a big celebrity in the tropical, those who have interest in tropical, that's for sure. They post about him all the time. So when we come back on the other side, we'll talk, as I mentioned, this incredible anniversary that he participated in over in the Philippines around Haiyan, a really, really significant storm that hit that area. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. I have my friend Josh Morgerman, who lives during the hurricane season in Bay St. Louis. He's originally from New York City, but he went on to have a terrific media marketing career in L.A. His name of his company is Symbolaze. They do a lot of different stuff, but including brand marketing, which is kind of his specialty. But during the season, he lives here. Now, the season's about to be over. Usually, he probably would be back in L.A., but he's finishing up his house in Bay St. Louis, which we talked about at the beginning of the show, and that's exciting. Hey, the one thing we didn't mention is your reality TV show specifically on Weather Spy, and boy, they've done a great job of producing those. Let's tell people how to see that, and then also, you can give us the latest. You can do another season.
Yeah, so we produced 13 episodes. It was a big series. That was series 1, and it played on a bunch of streaming platforms. Weather Spy is the channel, which you can get on a bunch of streaming platforms. Now it's available on demand, but actually I have to find out where it's available on demand. I'm actually not sure. I think it's like on Zumo and Samsung Plus and stuff like that. But it did well. The series did very well. The Trusted Media Brands are really happy with how it did. That's the parent company for Jukin, and they acquired Jukin actually, which is the company that produced the show. So now we're in talks about a season 2. So it's funny now that having produced this whole series now, it's given me a lot of insight in terms of like what are the building blocks and the material that the producers and the directors need to put together an episode. So now when I'm on a chase, it informs kind of what I do. And my new rule of thumb is basically just shoot everything. Even when you're standing around an airport, get a shot of that, because that's a building block for the story of like you're getting there. When I'm in a really bad mood and I don't like how the chase is going and I'm really feeling grouchy, even though I don't want to, that's the time to do a piece to camera to talk about how I'm feeling, because as grouchy as I'm feeling, that makes good TV, because they want to get that range of emotions and stuff, and they don't want to just see that chasing is easy. They want to see the ups and downs of it. That's what gives the show texture and makes it interesting. Well,
congratulations on that, and good luck with the season 2. That's cool.
Hopefully.
If not them, it'd be somebody, because you're getting better. You're getting better at just as you pointed out, capturing the video, and you bring a good producer into the conversation, and it makes for really good TV. It really does. And like I think it was the inaugural show of Weather Spy was Typhoon Haiyan. And
Exactly.
it was a really, really significant storm that killed a lot of people in the Philippines. And Josh was in the middle of it. And you got to go see his telling of that story. It was incredible. But they went from chasing to saving, and it was just an incredible experience. And you went back there and got to visit with the people that you met during that chase. And I was blown away with how they just welcomed you back into their community.
Oh yeah, I mean, so this city it's Tacloban City in the Philippines. It's central Philippines. So Super Typhoon Haiyan was the equivalent of a very high-end Category 5 hurricane, and it hit this city directly head-on. City of about 220,000 people. The city is on the tip of a peninsula, and it's pretty low-lying. And a tremendous storm surge at the height of the storm just swept the entire city, including downtown. The official death toll 6,000, but even government officials off the record say to me it was likely 15 to 25,000, just dead bodies everywhere. So at the height of the storm, my chase partners and I, we jumped in the water to pull people out to rescue them. And I'm very proud to say, no one in our hotel died. The hotel went underwater, but we managed to get everyone upstairs. No one in our hotel died. There were injuries, but we were really psyched about that. But anyway, the place was just, the level of destruction is hard to put into words. Just whole neighborhoods just wiped away. Actually looked kind of like the Mississippi Gulf Coast after Katrina, that level, like atomic bomb level destruction. Actually that's a good equivalent, where just whole places, like you can't even recognize them. Like you can't even find the streets, like that level of destruction. So I went back 3 months after, and then I went back a year after. And then I just went back for the 10-year anniversary. So I hadn't been back there in 9 years. And I have to say it was thrilling. Now, earlier in this episode, you described it as a celebration, and then you sort of caught yourself. What's interesting is that this year they called it a celebration. We talked about this with them, and they talked about how it had always been a sort of a day of mourning. And this year they decided, you know what? Nope, it's a celebration, because just to celebrate their resiliency and how they fought back, kind of like the Mississippi Gulf Coast. They're only 10 years on from their catastrophe, but the place is, it's better than it was in a lot of ways, so that's the silver lining. You can't bring back the human lives, and a lot of people died, but you can sort of celebrate that the city is coming back better than it was. And I think they're really trying to emphasize that, and I felt really good. Felt really good to go back.
It was cool seeing. I mean, first of all, you took a lot of pictures, and you related to your followers that it was almost like coming home. Immediate recognition. You blown away with how much construction and other improvements that have been made, as you pointed out. I mean, really, when you have somewhere that's not been hit for a long time, and then suddenly you wipe it off, you get a chance to kind of, in a way, with blank sheet of paper, go back at it, refortify to prepare for the next storm. And there's a lot of correlation, frankly, between the Mississippi Gulf Coast and what you saw in that wonderful Philippines town. And to think that 250,000 people lived there, that's very significant.
Oh yeah, no, it's crazy. And what's interesting is in a lot of East Asia, these gargantuan storm surges that we get in like Mississippi and Louisiana, that's very specific to this region. There are other parts of the world. Usually, when I'm chasing in Japan and Taiwan, this is going to blow your listeners' minds. In those places, like a lot of them, storm surge is not a factor, because the continental shelf offshore is shaped differently, and it's not conducive to storm surges. So you won't even get much storm surge. It's not even a factor. But this part of the Philippines is sort of more like the United States, where it's got that flat, swampy land and that very gentle offshore slope that allowed for basically like a Mississippi-style storm surge. Mm. But instead of it being, smaller towns and cities, you had a big city in its way. And that's why so many people died.
They welcomed you with open arms.
Oh, like the treatment, Mark and James and I, we went as a trio, and we are welcomed back as heroes. I think it's because, there was.
I know who Mark and James are, but Mark, James, and Josh are all cult heroes in the chase arena. So explain who Mark and James are.
So I chased Super Typhoon Haiyan with Mark and James, my two chase partners, two British guys. We went there together, and at the height of the storm, Mark and I jumped in the water to rescue people. There was wreckage under the water. We had to jump in this black, disgusting water. It was like just storm surge in a city. For some reason, I was lucky. My legs didn't touch anything, even though I couldn't see under the water. Mark hit some wreckage. His leg was totally ripped open. I mean, really down to the bone. It got so infected. We were stuck there for a couple days. And by the time he got back to Taiwan, he lives in Taiwan because his wife is Taiwanese. By the time he got back to Taiwan, his leg was it was like basically rotting off. He was 1 day from amputation, was what they told him. And he had to have a bunch of very painful surgeries over the course of a year to kind of fix his leg. It's good now. It has some scars, but it's good. We are treated like heroes when we go back there, like big banners welcoming us. We kind of stand out there because we're these tall white guys, but like people just coming up to us wanting to get pictures with us. I mean, nonstop. Like we are really. I think here's what I think it is. I think that this is a part of the developing world. I think they appreciate that these Westerners took an interest in what was happening there, and that not only did we rescue people, but that we also got the story out to the world, to show, James's footage is iconic. I mean, James's footage is really, I mean, I took footage too, but James is a terrific videographer, and he was the one, his footage is really what got onto all the news channels to show the world what happened. And I think that's how the help started coming in, that's what made it a top news story around the world and got the resources coming in, was that there were some Westerners in there getting the story out to the wealthy part of the world, And what's interesting, one last thing I want to add is all of the speeches that we heard from the president of the Philippines on down to the mayor and other local officials, they took great care to thank the outside help, the other countries that help, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations that came in. They recognize that as a big part of the recovery for them, and that was I really believe because we got the story out.
It was, that's how I knew about it. Long before I knew you. You're the way you guys, all three of you, told the story, and you were on all the major networks, and we learned. It's important that we know what happened there because it tells you what can happen if you don't really appreciate or understand how severe the storm surge can affect a community. And, it could have been way worse here in coastal Mississippi had it been a night storm for Katrina. Can you only imagine? So anyway, we're going to continue our conversation in the final segment with Josh Morgerman when we return. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. I have my friend Josh Morgerman. He grew up in New York City at a very young age, kind of got interested in hurricanes. He actually became a hurricane historian. He found tremendous success in his life developing this marketing company, but along the way, just continued to chase hurricanes. And then he became the top hurricane chaser in the world. Hey, when we went to break, we were talking about this. It was a celebration. It was a celebration of their resiliency and coming back, the 10-year anniversary in this coastal community of the Philippines where Typhoon Haiyan hit. 3 hurricane chasers, Josh Morgerman among them, went back there and were celebrated by the community because they helped tell this story. But one of the important stories is when you ask yourself, how did thousands of people die? How did thousands of people die? And we're going to correlate some of what Josh learned about that with something that is important for you if you're especially new to coastal Mississippi. You need to pay attention to as it relates to future storms. But Josh, tell us the story. Why did so many people die?
Well, it's painful to talk about because it was so unnecessary. So, as I said earlier, probably between 15 and 25,000 people died. It was never documented. But the reason is because folks, the PAGASA, which is the Philippines Weather Service, had started to use the word storm surge in its forecast, because they use English in the Philippines. No one in the Philippines knew what that meant. No, they had no idea what storm surge meant. And think about it. If you don't know what it means, it's not intuitive that it's water. So people didn't realize the water was going to come up like that. So there's this tremendous storm surge, just swept the whole city in the region. Afterward, I talked to people the next day, and they said, why didn't they tell us a tsunami was coming? If they just told us a tsunami was coming, then we would have gotten out of the way. And at first, my initial reaction, because I'm a weather nerd, I'm like, well, it wasn't a tsunami. They can't call it a tsunami because a tsunami is caused by geographical or geological events, and this was a meteorological event. And then I realized, what? It doesn't matter. To people on the ground, it was a tsunami. It actually had a tsunami-like behavior. So the bottom line is, it was a communications breakdown. And the good news is now, folks in the Philippines, there is an awareness now because of Super Typhoon Haiyan. There's an awareness now of what storm surge is. They understand it's basically like a tsunami, and people get out of the way. And they've had no death tolls anywhere near that in typhoons since then, because people now understand. It was a very costly lesson, but it seems like it was learned. So that's a silver lining. But it just goes to show you, and I think our big tragedies in the United States, the Galveston hurricane of 1900, where 8,000 to 12,000 people died. It wasn't a communications breakdown in the sense of people not knowing what words meant, but it was a communication breakdown in the sense of people didn't know the hurricane was coming. So storm surge deaths are always, always avoidable as long as people understand what's coming.
Yeah, and again, the story of Hurricane Katrina, we knew we were going to have high storm surge, but not as high as it ultimately was. And as a result, we often said at the Sun Herald that we thanked God that it was a daytime storm, because it gave people who unfortunately were washed out of their homes the opportunity to hang on to trees or find something floating to grab hold of. And thousands of people in coastal Mississippi did that. If it had been a nighttime storm, Josh, I can't even begin to imagine how bad it would have been. But a lot of people were caught off guard because even though they did warn that it was going to be high, no one ever anticipated that it would be as high as it ultimately was. I mean, like in Waveland near you, more people were killed north of the railroad tracks. And for Camille, that's what stopped the water. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with Katrina is, it's hard to anticipate a sort of a benchmark event. I mean, that was a world record. Who in Mississippi that day expected that they would experience the highest storm surge on record in the Western Hemisphere? I mean, y'all should feel really proud that you lived through literally a world record, or not a Western Hemisphere record in terms of storm surge, I mean, and what's so crazy is I think, people in Mississippi, if anyone, I mean, folks here really are very savvy more than anywhere. I mean, folks here are hurricane nerds. They get it here. Folks really get it here, and they understand. And even you guys who are so savvy to the threat were caught off guard because of the magnitude of that event.
Yeah, the irony of the Philippine story, the Haiyan story, and what caused so many people to die. The irony is that the headline in the Sun Herald the day after Hurricane Katrina, the headline read "Our Tsunami," because it was the year after the big tsunami, and it was literally our tsunami. And for people who are just new to the area and don't fully appreciate it, what's interesting, too, there was some graphics that the Weather Channel used to use that showed the water calmly coming up. I noticed today they got a little bit of ripple on top of the graphics, but that's still not very accurate. What I described it as the whitewater fury of the Colorado River after a heavy rain. That's what I observed, and just violent and high waves and places that you would never have imagined. And that's what, the water gets in the house, and then all of the furniture becomes battering rams on the way back out again. And that's how people get killed. Hey, we're out of time, Josh. It has been a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend. Happy New Year to you. I'm sure we'll talk before the end of the new year, but I hope you have a great New Year, my friend.
Thanks, Ricky. It's always good to come on this show. I appreciate it.
It's been awesome. Talk to you soon. Listen, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.